Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Deconversion Stories. Thank you all for being here. Today, I'm talking with my friend Bryce Cornell, also known as Captain Bryce pretty much everywhere. Like, you'll see him on Twitter there, you'll see him on Facebook, stuff like that, which I have links to below, by the way, as well. And he also is one of the co-hosts of Justin's Empathetic Atheist show on Tuesdays, you said it was, correct?
Yeah, and over there I'm known as Bryce Rooney. So I got a couple of different handles there, but yeah.
Believe me, I got tons of nicknames too. Mostly it's asshole, but anyway. Bryce, what I do here is I talk to people about their journeys away from whatever belief system they were once a part of, and the ups and the downs and the trials and tribulations, that kind of thing. So what I usually ask is for my guests usually to take us back to the beginning when they were in a belief system and kind of how they found their way out, as the dominoes start falling, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Okay. So I suppose it's an interesting story. I feel like I've told it so many times that I almost feel like it's kind of not interesting anymore, but there's always new details in there that I add each time. So pretty much it starts off, I was raised with a Christian background, not really hardcore fundamentalist, family, pretty liberal. I grew up in the Northeast. I grew up in New York, actually, and my mom, pretty firm believer, but never really pushed any sort of religion on me. My dad was so. Yeah, it's funny. He's actually more religious now than he was then. He almost seemed more agnostic back in the day. Now,
really. Yeah,
I think it's always been there, but he never really took it seriously. Now that he's older, I think he's taking it a little bit more seriously than he did. But yeah, just totally, it was just kind of in the background. It's what they believed. I think my mom's family, that side of the family, mostly from a Pentecostal Church of God background. Dad's side, mostly Baptist and non-denominational, but just both Protestant, regular, middle of the road Christianity, but not like right wing or evangelical fundamentalist Christians. It was just kind of, we believe in God, we believe in Jesus. I never really grew up going to church regularly, although I had been occasionally. My grandparents, actually, both grandparents.
Like even when you were just a kid, you didn't get dragged out all the time?
Not really, no. I mean, I had the opportunity to go, but usually it was when we were visiting like my grandparents, because they were a lot more religious. They were a lot more devout. My mom's mother and my dad's side as well. So whenever I would visit them, usually that was when I had the opportunity to attend church because they always went. And my aunt and uncles, their, cousins, extended family, much more religiously devout, I guess, than my immediate nuclear family, so to speak. But it was never really this thing where I was beat over the head about you have to, pray this way, you have to read the Bible every day, you have to go to church. It was just, they never really forced religion on me. But I did always have that kind of belief system because, as far as I knew, there was a God and Jesus died for everybody's sins. And we live in a Christian nation and everyone around me celebrates Christmas and Easter. And so that's just what I considered normal. And I believed it because everyone else seemed to believe it as well, and it wasn't until I turned about 19, right around the time when I joined the military. I'm retired military, by the way, but when I was 19, I joined the military, and that's right around the time when I started reading the Bible a little bit more. I started getting a little bit more religious, I think, because I started meeting people who were much more religious than I was, and this is
a fitting in thing, or you think?
I don't know if it was a fitting in. Well, I will say that in some ways, the military is a very religiously oriented institution.
Sure.
It's definitely like even when I was in boot camp, I mean, your free day off was Sunday where you got to go to church, and so that was just kind of the thing. Yeah, that was kind of the thing that people did to, to do something. But I felt like, that was the first time where I really felt like I was feeling the Holy Spirit. It could have just been the homesickness, being away from home, being around other people who were in a similar stressful environment, and then rejoicing together. And so, I was definitely feeling the Spirit, and that kind of inspired me to dig in a little bit deeper about what my beliefs actually were. So,
right.
I started reading the Bible and seeing the wisdom of it, what I interpreted as, the wisdom at the time, at that age. This was pre 9/11 as well. 9/11 kicked off like a couple of years after I had been in. And at that point, just with the turmoil going on, I deployed shortly thereafter, and things like that can kind of make you get even more into religion than you were before, because it's like,
well, especially with all that was behind the attacks, right? It was religious based as well. So
exactly, and just learning about a religious extremism, but the Islamic religious extremism made me kind of more prejudiced towards that and more devout in my own belief, seeing it as righteous and seeing that the people who were attacking us as, unrighteous. And so in a lot of ways, just the situation I was in and the context, reading the Bible and trying to match it up, it seemed like it was matching up with what I was reading. And so that seemed to affirm my faith, just with the powers of the world and people trying to persecute Christians, which I thought America was a Christian nation at that time. I had some interesting views, but again, I'm 19, 20, 21 years old, right? And so I'm a young guy learning about my religion for the first time and learning about the world for the first time. And that's how I interpreted reality. And so a number of years after that, I started getting into apologetics, mostly online, through just joining different, religious debate groups. They were kind of in their infancy at this time. This is the early 2000s we're talking now. It was not close to what it is today. But at the time I was,
has it.
but at the time I was definitely on the Christian side of the house, and I was very confused by atheists. I didn't understand why people didn't believe in God. I didn't understand why people were anti-religion. And I felt like my perspective then was that a lot of the arguments they were making were straw man arguments, that they were attacking elements of religion that I didn't believe in. And so I saw it as sort of unjustified attacks against my faith, and I wanted to kind of defend that. And so I used to argue with a lot of these atheists and agnostics, and also because I didn't really know what their perspective was. I had never really met atheists before, or anyone who identified as
agnostic. That you knew of. Yeah,
that I knew of. I probably had, but I'd never really had a conversation about religion or theology up until this point. And so I had my own preconceived ideas about these people, that they were, just kind of lost souls, maybe evil, maybe like morally nihilistic or whatever. These were my assumptions about them. Sure. And also that they were misguided. They just didn't understand the Bible, and they had been taught it wrong, which is why they were skeptical about it. And so I thought that this was my opportunity to maybe explain to people why, I believe in the Bible, why I believe it makes sense with reality that we observe. And also, I was very arrogant in my youth, because I consider myself a fairly educated person, but reasonable at this time. But I also did when I was younger, even when I wasn't. And like I think I read a statistic one time that said 80 or 90% of people think that they're above average in intelligence, so which is kind of funny. But so 80 to 90% of people think that they're above 50%, anyway, I was one of that 80% that thought I was more intelligent than everyone else, and I thought that maybe I can explain this Bible in such a way that other people hadn't considered, in a way that would make sense, in a way speaking from reason, and I was also very much into science as well, and biology and astronomy, and I actually was fairly educated in that, at least as far as high school education goes, but they were interests of mine.
You didn't have conflicts pop up because you're into like astronomy and biology and stuff?
So on that, yes, of course, that there's obviously going to be conflicts between science and traditional, the traditional Christianity, and the way that most people read the Bible. My way around that was, at this point, I'm comfortable calling it cherry picking. But, at the time, I simply viewed it as, my interpretation is, I wasn't as beholden to some of the dogmatic principles that other people were. I didn't necessarily, I consider myself an old earth creationist, so I didn't believe in the young earth. That
Right,
was
okay.
obviously contradicted by science. And to be honest, I didn't even really find it biblical. It seemed like a man-made thing upon researching it. I did believe in evolution, but I interpreted it as God's mechanism. It was a guided process by God, and so everything was through this veil of creation. Everything that we have is a creation, and it's a guided process by God. And so that's kind of how I was able to reconcile some of the scientific dilemmas. And also morality. A lot of people, my moral views didn't necessarily match up to all of the other Christians that were around me. I didn't have a problem with LGBT people, mostly because at the time I didn't realize that I was LGBT. I knew, but I wasn't out about it. One, I was in the military and under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and so I was legally not able to be out. But it was also something that I wouldn't have admitted to myself just for the time that I was living in. So, but having had the experience of growing up with that, I couldn't interpret the Bible through a homophobic lens, which is so easy to do because it's a homophobic book, but I was kind of in denial about the homophobia that's in there. I just kind of had to read it in the most benign way possible. And this doesn't really mean homosexuality. It just means, something else. I don't even remember how I used to justify it because it was kind of ridiculous. And there was no reason for me to try to validate it that way.
Recently, I heard, though, that there was a mistranslation, that it wasn't supposed to be about homosexuals. It was supposed to be about lying with kids, like children.
Right. Yeah. So there is that, and there is some legitimacy to that. And it was definitely something that I was trying to find. I was trying to get to that interpretation, which, as far as I know, is the correct one. And it's just been bastardized and misused all these years. But that's not the point, because just the fact that I was trying to get to that answer proves that this was not an honest search for the truth,
Right. Okay. Sure.
And but neither was my belief in scripture in the first place. It was just something that was imparted onto me that I never really questioned or looked at critically before.
Right.
I didn't learn about critical thinking until I went to college, and then where I could examine arguments and look at fallacies and look at what makes a strong debate and examine philosophy and reason throughout history, and seeing how all the arguments that I was using to justify my faith really didn't work. And even just the concept of faith itself didn't make any sense, at least not from the way that it's taught in the Bible, because it's taught as a methodology for arriving at truth, which is kind of contradictory, because the Bible gives you the truth, or at least it claims to. The Bible claims to give you the truth. It also claims that the Holy Spirit gives you the truth. It says that it teaches you everything that you need to know. And so you really shouldn't have to have faith on top of that, but nevertheless, it says that, faith is the assurance for things hoped for and the evidence of things unseen. It's a methodology for arriving at, and, in the absence of facts, you can just rely on faith and it will be equal to evidence. Well, that's wrong. I didn't understand that was wrong then, but learning just basic epistemology, it's clearly wrong. Faith is not a path to truth, No. It's no more a path to truth than flipping a coin.
It's not a virtue either.
It's not.
It's like the opposite of virtue.
Right. I never really, well, I'm not going to say never, because at one time I must have, but at this point, I don't understand why people consider it to be a virtuous thing. If you have the option between faith and evidence, you should always choose evidence.
Yes.
If you have evidence, you don't need faith. Faith is the thing that people use when they don't have evidence. So why would that be the virtue? But anyway, getting back to the deconversion process, it was through my, trying to convince other people to, believe in the Bible, my visualizing, I was challenged by these atheists who I found knew the Bible much better than I did. I tended to, when I was a Christian, I only read certain parts of the Bible, the parts that I understood, because a lot of it's confusing. A lot of it is, language, especially if you're reading a King James, So I ended up buying like 2 or 3 different Bible translations just so that I could cross-reference and try to get the best understanding of what the authors were trying to say. But I tended to stick mostly to certain passages that I felt like were, inspirational and things that were positive, and avoided all of the negative stuff. But the problem with that is you remain ignorant about what the Bible actually says. And so all of a sudden, when you're confronted with these atheists who've read the Bible and they're asking you questions about genocide and slavery and all these other things that seem immoral, and you don't have a good justification, you don't have a good argument against those things, you end up looking like a fool, And I didn't want to look like a fool. I wanted to make them look like fools. And so that meant that I had to learn the Bible. And 1 Peter 3:15, always be prepared to give a reason for your faith, but do so with gentleness and respect. So I wasn't overtly trying to make them look like fools. I was trying to make them look like fools in a nice way. It's essentially what that meant,
Plus, you're following what the Bible says as well. Only a fool says there's no God. Only a fool in his heart says there's no God, or something like that. Exactly. So I had already concluded that they were fools because that's what it told me, and I didn't question it. I never questioned anything that I read. I just accepted it as though it was true. But the problem there, obviously, is that I was being the one made to look the fool because they knew the Bible and I didn't. So this meant that I needed to study a little bit more, and I needed to get a little bit deeper in there. And I started reading the Old Testament, and I started getting outside of the Gospels, and I started reading Revelation and all these other areas of the Bible where I now had to have answers for these atheists, answers to, it wasn't just a matter of deconflicting things like evolution and science. It was deconflicting almost all of the miraculous claims with science, Noah's Ark, the flood, dinosaurs. I mean, these are things that are just, it's okay for the Bible to be erroneously interpreted once or maybe twice, but when it says like 50 things in there that the plain reading clearly contradicts science, now there's a problem, and now this is like post hoc rationalizations. You're coming up with excuses for why the Bible is written so poorly to lead people away. If science is real and revealing of facts about the world, and this is something that God gave us, why would he also give us a book that denies all the evidence that we see? There was a contradiction there that I couldn't reconcile because I was convinced that God gave us science. God gave us the sun, moon, and the stars, as it says in Genesis. Sure.
God gave us all of these revelatory things. I think the book of Psalms says, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands, and they give us knowledge. So it didn't make sense to me why he would be giving us knowledge that is contradicted by the knowledge contained in his word. So that was the first problem I ran into. And then I started getting into the moral arguments for, if God is a perfectly moral, perfectly good, perfectly just being, how could he have sanctioned slavery? This is particularly difficult to reconcile as an African American. In my culture, Christianity is kind of a big thing. A lot of us grow up in the church. I mean, I didn't exactly grow up in a church, but my whole family did. And that there's a long historic tradition of that going all the way back to slavery, which is, there's a little bit of irony in here because slavery is the very thing that I couldn't defend morally, and so in my attempts to do that, I went to the standard, well, it's not really slavery, it's indentured servitude, or it's the
same thing.
It's the happy, friendly kind of slavery. It's not the kind of slavery we had in America, which is obviously, those are nonsensical arguments, especially when you read in Leviticus and you read in Exodus where it says you're allowed to beat your slaves. Well, how's that any different? That's exactly what the colonial Americans did to their slaves, Yeah. You could beat them as long as they don't die within 2 days. That doesn't sound like the happy, friendly, indentured servitude that I'm pretending it is, And it says
exactly.
it says you can own them for life. So that's not indentured servitude. Indentured servitude is not taking slaves of other nations and owning them for life and being allowed to pass them on to your children as property. That's not indentured servitude. So really, I was just lying to myself. But it took me reading that and trying to find excuses to get around it and failing before I realized that, okay, this is wrong. Clearly the Bible is wrong. I finally got to the point where I was reading it. Okay, that's wrong. Genocides, go and kill the men, women, and children. Today, that's a war crime. I learned a lot about the law of armed conflict in the military and being deployed. These are mandatory things that you have to learn. And we would instantly recognize that today in our less than civilized society as war crimes. So why would God sanction something that so obviously ought to be a war crime? So that didn't make any sense. So this is clearly wrong. Came to that realization, wasn't quite ready to let it go though. I figured maybe the Bible's just been corrupted, but the good parts of the Bible, that still must have come from God. I mean, Jesus dying for our sins, sacrificing himself for all mankind. There's no better thing. This couldn't have come from a man. No man would do that, right? No man would die for something that wasn't true, right? Except when they're flying into buildings and not
Heaven's Gate cult.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I'm talking about all this as someone who went to war after people who died for a cause that they believed in, that I didn't believe in, and so this happens all the time. And so this was not remarkable. The fact that you have leaders, or I don't want to say cult leaders, but you do have cult leaders that profess to be prophets of God with unique information that are leading people somewhere and willing to die for that cause. That's not remarkable in history, And so, so the Bible became something that was really just logically irreconcilable with science, with morality, with reality, as I understood it. And so that was kind of something I mostly had to let go. I think I still held on to. I wasn't completely deconverted at this point, mind you. It was just something, I think I kind of segued into Unitarianism, because Trinity is another one that can't be logically reconciled as a Christian. A lot of Christians try to do it. That's a doctrine that was embedded into Christianity hundreds of years after the death of Christ. It's not really biblical, but a lot of people, you can cherry pick the Bible to get to Trinity, and that's what the bishops did and taught to everyone, and that's what everybody does now. But it doesn't make sense, and I don't think I even ever really accepted that, even when I was a Christian. So a lot of other Christians probably would have called me a heretic or some other religion for not accepting the Trinity. But to me, that wasn't necessary as long as I believe that Jesus died for my sins, which is actually what it says.
I thought the Trinity was almost strictly a Catholicism thing.
Well, they invented it for sure.
Yeah, I know that.
But they also invented almost every other doctrine that Protestants follow now. The Protestant Reformation was mostly a result of corruption within the Catholic Church, and the Pope, the fallacy of the popes, which of course they claim to be infallible, but the fact that they were clearly corrupt men who were sinners and not leading people, didn't have the people's best interest in mind. They were murderers, they were turncoats, they were probably rapists. We don't know a lot about them, but we know enough about them. Well, I'm speculating, but we know enough about them to know that their history was not really reflective of what the Bible says, the people leading the church should be. And so that's where Protestantism really came from. But they took most of the established beliefs with them. There were a few differences, and they each church kind of dropped, transubstantiation, that's not a thing. Veneration of the Virgin Mary, that probably doesn't make sense. Let's filter this out to the basics. Let's get rid of all of the Roman traditions that we can see that they added that don't align to our faith, and that seem tied to Catholicism, and we'll give that up. But they didn't give up Trinity. That's still kind of the bedrock or cornerstone of most mainstream Christianity now, but it was nothing that I could ever really logically reconcile, and so I never bothered to try to do that, even when I was a Christian. But now I can call it out for what it is, whereas I would have been silent on that before. It wasn't until like I said, I went to school, I started learning philosophy, started learning about other religious traditions, started learning about the Bible, not the content of the Bible, but the history of the Bible, how it came together, what it actually was, what it was made of, who decided what books would go there, in what order, which books were left out. And I realized this is a man-made thing. This is not something that God would have done. He wouldn't have given his message so poorly, in this poor way,
Yeah.
Scripture is the worst way to deliver.
He didn't though. It was all oral tradition until they decided to write everything down.
Right, but even that's even worse though, because
exactly.
I used to play the telephone game when I was
exactly
second grader, and the answer is always wrong. That game. No one has ever won that game because just the problem associated with that method of communication. Communication studies was my minor, by the way. So learning how people communicate and how easy it is to get a message wrong. Sure. These are all unfalsifiable things. This is God is going to get the message right. He can do it. Even though humans are flawed, God is perfect. So he's going to preserve his message. Well, that's an unfalsifiable thing because God is the thing that we're trying to prove in the first place. So if there is no God, he's not getting anything right. He's not doing anything, And so if you have to start off believing that before you even get the message, that's not how knowledge works.
That's right.
That's not knowledge. That's a belief with no justification at all. You have to read something and then examine it logically before it could be considered knowledge or not. If you just go into it thinking whatever message I get is correct because it comes from God, well, then it doesn't matter what the message is, and you have no way of validating the thing that you started off with in the first place. But you don't learn that they don't teach you that in church. When I did go, I definitely listened intently, but I never heard any preacher. Reverend, pastor, priest, whatever kind of church I was attending, because I did go to a couple of different kinds. I never heard any of them talk about what the Bible was and how it came to be, other than describing it as the Word of God. They could quote the Bible all day long, but as far as where did we get the Bible, like how was it made this way? How was it? How did we get it in its current form? I never heard that lesson in church. I had to read history and learn about philosophy and communication studies, and then do my own research to find these answers, And when you find the answers, it's pretty damning for the religion, So learning about that and just learning about a lot of the arguments I was using. Design is one that I've debunked. Well, many other people have debunked it before me, but it came to the point where I had to argue. One of the things when you're learning critical thinking and argumentation, you have to be able to argue both sides of an argument. So you have to be able to defend,
like steel manning.
Yeah, exactly. So you have to be able to defend a point and then do the counter argument. And every single time I tried to do that with one of my religious beliefs, that's when the Christianity started getting lower and lower, and the theistic beliefs started just diminishing because I realized I didn't have any good arguments for what I was believing in, and therefore no justification for my beliefs. So, you hear the expression, the more you read the Bible, or the quicker you read the Bible, the quicker you become an atheist, words to that effect. And I think that's a little bit of a misnomer. I think that is certainly helpful.
It's a stretch.
It's a stretch, but it's certainly,
if you actually read it, like including the bad stuff, it can tend to bring people down.
It gets your foot in the door, or I should say out of the door of the church. But really what slams the door shut behind you is learning how the Bible came to be, and then reading some of the scriptures that are not in the Bible, and then trying to figure out why they weren't in the Bible, but these other ones are, and then learning about the order of the Bible and the dates and when these different books were written and things about the authors that, then you realize you don't really have a God-made document here. You have a man-made document by men with agendas who didn't know anything about science. They didn't know anything about morality. They knew the bare minimum of philosophy. They were certainly behind the Greeks, but they stole some of what they did and tried to put it in here and pass it off as God's wisdom. But there's contradictions all over the place. There's plot holes, I like to call them, in the Bible. I'm big into movies, and because even I will say my first step to skepticism actually happened as a child. It didn't lead me on the path to atheism, but something I always questioned, even as a young child, was the Exodus story. Moses freeing the slaves from Egypt, crossing the Red Sea. None of that stuff bothered me because, supernatural, okay, I've accepted that God is real, Satan is real, magic exists, I didn't have a problem at the time as a child with any of the supernatural things. The thing that didn't make sense to me was, and I think this comes from watching the Charlton Heston movie, The 10 Commandments, when I was a kid. I think it came on like every Easter or something. Yeah. So, but I remember watching.
I'm not religious and all that, but it's still it's a great movie. It's a fun movie.
But I remember watching it as a kid, and the part where Moses is up on Mount Sinai, and then he comes back, and all of the Israelites, they built a golden calf with all this gold that they had, because slaves, they had gold, right? Yeah. And they were all master craftsmen. They could all build a golden calf somehow, but they're worshiping it as their new god. So I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. They had already seen all of the miracles of the real God. They know the real God exists. They saw him part the Red Seas. They were led, out of Egypt. So he's gone for 30 days. And then all of a sudden they're worshiping a new God who they didn't witness anything from. That doesn't make any sense,
Yeah, exactly.
And I think I tried to ask someone, I was like, why are they worshiping a new God? And then the answer was something like, well, they have evil in their hearts, or that's just the nature of man. But that's not true. That's what the Bible would suggest. It doesn't actually say, it just says that they were wicked and they had turned away from God. But even if we accepted that people can be evil, this assumes that the entire nation of people was also stupid, right? So it's inconsistent with logic that all of them would have, for years, wandering the desert, but being witness to the miracles of God, would have forgotten about him after a month and started worshiping a new thing. That's not human nature. That's bad writing. That's just a plot hole.
I've actually been to the alleged path that they took in Israel and Egypt. Yeah. So, and it's funny because when I was there, I met a couple of guys who were studying the whole departure from Egypt of the Jews. Mm-hmm. And they're already this was like in the 80s. And they're like, you know what? This shit never happened. Because nothing has been found to support it.
Right.
And it shouldn't take them 40 years to get to a place that should take them, even with however, what was it, like 100,000 fucking people in tow, that should have taken them a couple of weeks at best to get to the
Yeah, so that particular argument, though, there is a Christian answer for that one. And I don't like I don't like using that argument, because even the Bible says that they were not led directly to where they were supposed to go. A lot of them, they started to lose their faith. They started questioning Moses. And because of their disobedience, God made them wander the desert on purpose as a punishment. So, so the fact that they wouldn't...
Confusion. Right.
God's not the author of confusion, except when he intentionally confuses people in that way, or when he confuses the languages of man so that they, stop building the Tower of Babel, or when he confuses the enemies of Joshua. He confuses all the time, but he's not the author of confusion. Just another contradiction. But it's plot holes like that, and in the story, the structure of a story, to where if this was something written by Tolkien or J.K. Rowling and try to, adapt it for a film, people would recognize it as a plot hole. They would say, that doesn't make sense. And this is within the realm of fantasy. You have to suspend your disbelief anyway. People are willing to do that, but they can see when elements of the story do not add up to the logic of the story itself. And you start seeing that when you read the Bible without the blinders on, without the preconception that whatever you're going to read is true. When you start reading it through the lens of skepticism, which is what you should read everything through, then you see how the story kind of falls apart. And it was kind of like overnight, really, once I started, when I realized that I was trying to come up with justifications to make it work, to make the story work, to make it fit in with science, to make it moral. All of a sudden, I realized what I was doing. I wasn't following the evidence where it led. I was trying to lead it lead the evidence where I wanted it to go, and
Mhm.
because I had already decided that it's true. And so therefore I need to find the interpretation that makes it line up with truth. But that's incorrect epistemology,
Oh
and
yeah,
I
definitely.
realized what I was doing, and it was like a light bulb went out. It went up on in my head. I was like, "What the fuck? Am I really doing this? Am I really just trying to make it work at all costs? Clearly, it doesn't fucking work. The more time you have to spend making something work, that's an indicator that it doesn't. And as soon as I realized I was doing that, I became basically an atheist. I don't think I called myself that, but I knew that I didn't believe in this anymore. And I didn't have good reasons for really anything that I was believing. So this was about almost 4 years ago, I would say, maybe 3.5 years ago, to where that happened. So I would say I'm a fairly recent deconvertee, but yeah, and I'm 42 now. So I spent most of my life.
I never would have put you at 42, Bryce.
Yeah, most people
never.
don't make it that a lot, but yeah, I'm definitely older than I look and dress, obviously. So that's part of my problem. But yes, most of my life, most of my adult life as a Christian, most of my child life as a tertiary Christian, or being around a Christian environment. But yeah, and so that's pretty much it. And so now I am, I read a lot more. I still read the Bible, by the way. I don't have the whole thing memorized. I don't really plan to, but there were always areas of it that I, oftentimes when I'm having discussions with theists and with Christians in particular, and they give me a new interpretation of scripture, I need to refresh my memory.
Sure.
With not just the verses and the passages that they're giving me to justify their interpretation, but also the greater context. And a lot of times I'll read that whole chapter to figure out if it makes sense for them to be interpreting it the way that they do. So yeah, I'm still doing that, but yeah, and then getting outside of the Bible as well, because it's not a moral book. It's certainly not a lesson of morality. I've learned much more about morality and the difference between secular moral systems and theistic claims to morality. I'll put it that way, because there's no such thing as religious systems of morality. They're not really systems at all. They're just commandments, and assumptions and proclamations that certain things are good and certain things are bad. It's very black and white. It provides no methodology to solve moral dilemmas. And so there's really no moral systems at all. It's just divine command theory. So that's the inferiority of Christian morality or biblical morality. And I say it that way on purpose, because Christians can be moral. They can certainly be moral people, and they can certainly resolve moral dilemmas, but they can't do it using the Bible. Usually they're going outside of the Bible and using common sense and just, what they intuitively understand to be in the best interest of people. That's how most people do it, irrespective of the Bible. They will often attribute their ability to do that to the Bible, but there's not really much of a justification for that. But I just wanted to say that to make it clear that I do believe that Christians can be moral people. I certainly considered myself a moral person when I was a Christian, and I still do. But I understand morality much more now as an atheist than I ever did when I was a Christian.
Right. Well, in my opinion, unlike what a lot of Christians will tell you, is, objective morality just isn't a thing. I mean, we can, as a group or a community, we can agree on things as being objectively moral, but
yeah,
morals are subjective, bottom line, and they're also fluid as societies change.
Yeah, morality, I mean, you're totally right about that. There's no such thing as objective morality, because and I think people that use that expression, they either don't understand the definition of morality or the definition of objective. Or possibly both. They may not know either. But morality concerns the distinction between right and wrong, or good and bad behavior. But that word distinction, the word distinction in that definition implies that a judgment has to be made. You have to distinguish between right and wrong, right?
Right.
And so the fact that is the meaning of the word or how most people are using it makes it impossible for it to be objective, because it's now dependent on a mind. Something that's objectively true is true independent of a thinking agent.
That's right.
Yeah. Right. So if something has to be distinguished by a thinking agent, it can't be objective by definition. It must necessarily be subjective, even if it came from God. Even if you want to say morality is what God declares and it's objectively true
to him,
it's still subjective to the God. Right.
That's
right. So they don't understand the word objective.
I don't think they understand a lot of that. So
as long as someone exists that can disagree with someone else's moral declaration, that's the proof that morality is subjective.
That's right.
And as long as I can disagree with God, which I can, it doesn't matter that he's going to throw me in hell for doing it. As long as I have a brain that can diverge from what he says is moral, if I can come to a different conclusion, then morality is subjective.
That's right. Yep. A friend of mine once said something that actually always stuck with me. And it's not really about morality. He goes, we'll never really have world peace. There can never be world peace. Because even if we're down to 2 people left on the planet, we still have 2 different opinions.
Yeah.
And they're bound to clash at some time.
Yeah, some of that really depends on how you would define peace. I think the real issue is that people have different ideas about what peace is or what peace looks like.
Right.
What I think is peaceful, you may think is not acceptable at all. You may think we're living in chaos right now. I can call it peace, but to you, it's not. And so, different countries, different societies have, different conceptions of how the world should work and what peace looks like to them. And so just based on that, we'll never have a resolution on world peace. I think broadly speaking, when people use that term, they generally mean less war, less physical conflict, people getting along as best as they can. And so that's kind of how I take it when people use that, knowing that we'll always have disagreements.
Oh, Tangelo. I didn't know you had it in you.
Yeah, I actually didn't. I didn't see that comment there, but
hang on here. Yeah. What's the difference between a nun and a woman in a bathtub? One has hope in her soul, the other one has soap in her hole.
That's an interesting joke coming from. I thought he was a little bit more.
He's a regular guy. But he is a Christian, and he's a firm believer. But he's still just a regular guy, and I told him he's welcome to hang out if he doesn't proselytize. So,
right, he seemed like a decent guy when I had talked to him in the past. I didn't know that that seemed like a joke that would have been offensive to him, but I guess not.
We all have senses of humor that might be off kilter once in a while.
Yeah. I try to limit that, and unless I'm familiar with my audience, and so usually I save that to when I'm in more of a private room to where I know the reactions of the different individuals. Sometimes doing what I do, co-hosting the EA show now, Atheist Experience, Empathetic Atheist.
Empathetic Atheist.
Yeah, I want to be on Atheist Experience, and I just got finished watching it before this, so that's probably why that was on my mind. But Empathetic Atheist, the idea is that we're talking to people with an open mind, pushing back a little bit, but really trying to be accepting of other people's ideas and not make fun of them or belittle them in any such a way. And sometimes we can tell jokes that we think are funny and that everyone will recognize as a joke that other people will be really offended by,
Oh yeah.
And I've had that come back to bite me in the butt a little bit. So
me too.
Now I'm very careful about knowing my audience before I engage in that type of humor. But yeah, I think most people should lighten up.
I do too.
Yeah.
It can be tough though. Yes, Brian Stevens, you look like you were trying to get in touch with me there. This one here. Anyway, oh yeah, that's true. That's for you. Yeah, I can talk to Dan. Suggest you, mind you, he's got a lineup of people that he wants on there. So.
Well, Brian, if you actually go to his channel and go back a couple of weeks, you'll find the interview that I had with Dan. And actually, you'll find me co-hosting the show with Dan. He already had me co-host
were
one of
you?
the episodes there. Yeah, and so
Nice.
he's a great guy. He kind of turned me. He didn't turn me into a vegan because I'm not vegan yet, but I did. I was compelled by a lot of his arguments from the vegan perspective and the humanist perspective, and I have altered my eating habits to be less harmful. What I believe to be the harm that's imposed on animals as a result. I haven't completely given it up yet, but I'm reducing my carbon footprint, so to speak, in terms of reduction of meat. And I think that that's a good first step. But he was totally convinced me, because I was skeptical of vegan claims in the past, and just, talking to him, he's a really intelligent guy, especially for someone so young, and he's clearly thought about this. But he was
wisdom beyond his years, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was gracious enough to invite me to co-host on his show. I think we had him on the EA show. I believe we had him on like way back. And then, it just kind of led to me ending up on there. And so I was really grateful for that opportunity. And that's interesting. What's funny about that is because our beliefs are not 100% the same, obviously. And so I think a lot of people think that atheists all kind of believe the same thing, like that there's some sort of doctrine of atheism, or, that we're just these like-minded people. We have complete differences of opinion and different beliefs about everything else. The only thing that really makes us similar is that we don't believe in whatever
claims of deities. Yeah.
Right.
That's all atheism is. Do you believe in a God? Well, no. Then you're an atheist. That's all it is. That's all it addresses. So everything else is just like, people think, oh, well, scientists are atheists. Well, not all of them. There are a minor percent of them that are actually believers.
Right.
But, and as a community, we're not really a community. We have our little cliques and sects and stuff like that, you could say. But that's really the only thing we share in common. Although I'm sure you and I could say we both share an interest in music. We both probably share an interest in movies. There are things that we also have in common. But really, the only real connector for all the atheists is the fact that they just don't believe in claims of a deity.
Yeah, that's the only defining characteristic of atheism. I will say that I think that many atheists, at least in North America, share similar worldviews on morality. A lot of atheists identify as humanist as well.
I do.
It seems that most atheists are inclined to align to the political left more so than the political right, although it's not always the case. But most of the ones I run into seem more left thinking or more progressive than conservative. It seems that most atheists are more science oriented or have a curiosity about the different sciences. Not all of them. So there's definitely
chemistry for me, right?
Right. Chemistry was too hard for me, so I think I went in the astronomy and biology. Those were always the subjects that I found more interesting. Astronomy for sure.
Astronomy is really cool. Yeah,
and also astronomy, I think, is the single biggest proof against the claim of a young universe.
Yes,
it's absolutely. Instantly debunks any young Earth, young universe model. Just visually, we can visually determine that the universe is old, and so that was why I always had problems with that belief. But I don't know where I was going with that. I'm just talking about the similarity between, a lot of different atheists having similar worldviews on the different things. And I think that confuses people into thinking that there's some sort of doctrine or tenets of atheism, that you have to be into science to be an atheist. You have to be a humanist to be an atheist. And you don't have to be any of those things. It just so happens that a lot of people who are sort of go off in that direction. And there's a lot of reasons for that, I think. But I think if you were to interview an atheist from Japan, because most people in Japan are atheists too, but they don't necessarily have the same beliefs that atheists in the United States would, and so.
Right. Well, I knew a Japanese fellow that was an atheist as I was growing up, but he had a little bit of a tie to Shintoism.
Sure. Most of them do.
Yeah. So, which is an interesting belief system for sure. And probably, honestly, I think probably the whole Shintoism thing is what led me in my youth, and of course my Japanese buddy led me in my youth to get into anime, because a lot of it has that element in it, right? The spirits and all the cool stuff. So, and then I just became an anime fan, and this is, by the way, guys, back in the 70s, when really the only anime back then was what? Astro Boy, Robotech, and fucking Star Blazers, I think was one of them.
I remember. Yeah, I remember Robotech. I don't, but I never watched. I never got into it. Then I was into more of the kiddie, Americanized cartoons at that time. But yeah, no. There's definitely, I don't believe in the supernatural. I don't think that the word supernatural even makes sense conceptually.
It means outside of nature, and all we can measure is nature. So I'm there with you.
Nature appears to be the only thing that exists, and it is certainly the only thing that anyone can demonstrate exists.
It's the only thing we can measure.
Supernatural seems to just be a placeholder for things I don't understand, about nature. But
it's funny. Go ahead. In BC, there was an expression for years, supernatural British Columbia. But it wasn't meant in that fashion. It just meant super and natural, because we had all the fucking fir trees everywhere, right? So that's basically what they were going for with that.
Yeah, but I think where I was going was to say that a lot of atheists do believe in the supernatural. They don't believe in God. They may not believe in Christian theology or Muslim theology, but they can certainly believe in ghosts. They can believe in magic, witchcraft, astrology, all kinds of.
For a while.
Healing crystals. There's a lot of.
I was right there for a long time. I was doing that whole thing, the Wicca and all that. And even though I still considered myself atheistic at the time, but it was a weird time.
And you can be. There's nothing to. A lot of those people are atheists, but they're not.
True. I
don't share beliefs with them because I don't believe in the supernatural. Once I gave up Christianity, I kind of segued a little bit into, I talked about Unitarianism, I think, for like 5 minutes. And then when I realized that I'm just trying to find a way to hold on to this God belief that I don't really have anymore, it was straight to atheism, But for all of the reasons why I couldn't take the supernatural claims of the Bible seriously, I can't take any other supernatural claims seriously either, and examining ghost claims and poltergeists and all of these other supernatural things, just witchcraft, I don't see that there's data to support the existence of any of it.
There isn't.
I watch sometimes I have watched ghost hunters and things
I love it. I think it's hilarious.
Yeah, but isn't it interesting how they only come out at night? Or in really dark
that's the
places.
Lure of it, right? Yeah like
it's like, if there's ghosts, why aren't they in the daytime? Why aren't they out in the streets of Times Square doing things?
What about the Gettysburg one, where they were there in the daytime and they could see the spirits walking through the woods?
I haven't seen that one.
Okay.
So, yeah, but it doesn't ever seem to be in a place where someone can get like some solid, clear video evidence of it. It's usually with a handheld shaky cam that's far away, dark, dimly lit, poorly edited, and that's the best you can ever do with ghosts, And so, it's almost like, I don't know. I don't think I even need to finish that, but I'm not I'm a skeptic of all supernatural claims. I don't think that I don't think that supernatural makes sense, other than as an expression for things that people don't understand.
Yeah, it's pretty much what it is. Bye, Jenna, by the way. You're doing your show tonight, so have a good time.
Is that Jenna Belk?
No, Jenna Miu. Yeah.
Okay.
One of my partners in crime on the nonprofits, actually. There's quite a few of us now that are co-hosts of the nonprofits.
Sweet. So I hope that was an entertaining deconversion story, but I feel like it's boring because I I tell it so often. Yeah, exactly.
Brian. Yeah, no. 144K. That's hilarious. Anyway, actually, I can't forget. It was Sean Carroll, I think, is a astrophysicist guy who was talking about souls just are not possible. They tend to break the rules of physics. So,
yeah, they tend to break the rules of physics, and they also tend to defy pretty much everything we know about psychology and neurology. I have a degree in psychology, and just learning more about that field and how the brain works and the relationship between memory and neural pathways and how they can be altered and how we can affect every aspect of consciousness just by tinkering with the brain. Are we changing souls? That can I if I went into your brain, can I change your soul? Do I make you into a different person?
What about twins?
Get in
twins
there.
Come from a single egg, right?
Where does the second soul come from?
Yeah.
Does it happen when the egg splits? Then or what? I don't know. There's so many things about just conceptually that don't work. Everything we know about consciousness seems to be tied to the functioning of the brain, and when we can change things about it just by tinkering with it, then the concept of a soul really breaks down logically. You can't have your soul is supposedly the memory or the essence of the person that previously existed. But if we can change that while you're alive, then why should we believe that the original version of it survives death?
That's right. And not only that, another thing that kind of blows me away, every cell in your body is different today than it was 7 to 10 years ago.
Yes.
You're not even the same person.
No, I'm not the same person that I was when I started this conversation.
That's right.
I'm fundamentally different. I'm a fundamentally different Bryce Cornell now than I was at the top of the show when we started.
That's right.
Because
a bunch of cells have changed.
Yeah, my experiences are totally different. My perspective is different. I had a couple of shots of vodka, and so my sensory perception is different. I probably killed a couple brain cells. I may have generated new ones, but you are a different person, and you're always changing, and you're certainly a different person than you were. Right. I mean, compare my current self to my Christian self at 19,
Exactly.
So, if I thought that I was saved then, and I'm not saved now, why does the now part of me take priority? Why doesn't the majority of my life where I was a believer and following Christ, why wouldn't that get me to heaven? But the 1 year or 2 years of being an atheist, that speaks to the entirety of my character. It doesn't. It speaks to what I know now. My other self should go to heaven if there is such a place, which there isn't. But it certainly would be morally just for the Bryce Cornell of the first, 7 years of life to go to heaven, even if the new version of me just dies or goes to hell or wherever. I don't know. But we're two different people.
Don't worry about it, man.
We shouldn't be in the same place.
Don't worry about it, man. But I'm going to now bring in the producer of the show here to say hello. Mr. Mikey Famine is my producer.
Oh, hello there. Fancy meeting you, lovely chaps here. Bryce, how are you, sir?
Pretty good.
Good. I apologize for my tardiness. I had to take a nap. I did a little early drinking, and then I ate way too much pizza, and I was like,
"Is that a thing?"
I was like, I'm not gonna make it. There's no way I can do this. My eyes are already. This is my backyard. No.
The Milky Way. It's great.
Yes, it's home. But yes, I'm here and I'm ready to party now. So
sweet.
I have myself a cat nap. I'm all jazzed up. I'm ready to do some shit. What's up?
All right. Well, we are going to do the after party. So that's a little cue for the folks in the chat. If you're interested in joining us for the after party, you can message me on Twitter or Facebook, and I will give you a link. We're going to take. I always take a little bit of a break in between this and the after party, just so I can go and have a pee and a smoke, and then I come back and we jump in and have some fun. So first off, Bryce, dude, thank you so much for joining me today, brother.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Really good time.
This was fun.
And your story was interesting, so don't ever tell yourself that it's not. If people tell you to tell it again, do it, because I think these stories are important to tell and important for people to hear.
Yeah, I just hope it stays close enough to the original time that I told it. I think when you embellish even just a little bit over time, you may end up with a different story than you started with, believing that was the original story. So I have to make sure that I'm staying consistent. But as far as my recollection goes, that's what happened.
I just invent reality as I go. I just make something up, run in that direction full speed.
There you go. Whatever works for you.
Hasn't steered me wrong yet.
To address a statement that Atangelo made in the chat earlier, Atangelo, your neurons are also made of cells, and they do replace each other. So don't think that your neurons don't change, because they do. Just so you know.
Was he saying that neurons were unchanging?
Yes, but they change all the time. They constantly change.
Yeah. They're just like all of your other cells do.
They are made of basic cells, so they do change. You do not have the same neurons in your head today as you had when you were like a kid. So
no, they die and then they're replaced by new ones.
Exactly.
I think a lot of people have this idea that your neuron is basically where your thoughts are contained or where your memories are contained, and that's not really what
they're mechanisms. That's what they are. They send information around to different parts of your body and your brain. So, and they're made of cells, and those cells get replaced. So there you go. Anyway. Anyways, guys, first and foremost, before we get out of here, I have a few mentions, exactly what you see below. Thanks to all my amazing patrons. You guys are what keeps this show going and improving all the time. Also, don't forget that Randolph and I will be hosting a show coming up real soon called True North Talk. If you haven't subbed to our channel yet, it's going to be a lot like the call-in shows that you're familiar with at the ACA, the Talk Heathen, the Truth Wanted, the AXP, that kind of thing. So head over and give us a sub over there. And yes, of course. I'm now also a host of the Nonprofits with the amazing Jenna Mia, who's in the chat with us earlier. So head over to that channel and give it a sub as well. And of course, the last Saturday of every month, Seamus and Andy and myself do a little show called Atheist Drinking Out Loud. And you never know when we're going to come knocking on your door to be a guest on that show. And actually, this month, our guest is sitting right there. Mr. Mikey Fammon's going to be a guest on the show tonight. And Bryce, I think we'll hit you up one of these days, because I think you should come on in.
Yeah, it sounds like fun. I mean, I'm drinking right now, and so I'm sure that'll be a good time.
Yeah, especially if you're doing the vodka shots. Fuck yeah, you're in.
I can tell that we are going to be friends.
Yeah. It's actually the same shot. It's a double shot, but I've been sipping on the same one since the start. So it's not like
I like to do that with my scotch. So I got you. And Otangelo, your brain produces thoughts, but your neurons are what passes the thought from the originating point to the part where you store your thoughts. That's all the neurons do. Anyway, your memories and stuff, and they won't change. Well, they do change, actually. Your brain is a very tricky thing. So
yeah, they can actually. If
absolutely.
If your brain is damaged, then you can lose. That's what Alzheimer's is, really.
Yep.
It's brain damage in the memory centers of the brain.
Ooh, are we talking neural stuff in the after party? I am so with this.
Randolph, it's not on my channel, so I don't need someone taking production duties. It's all up to Andy. It's all on Andy's show. So. That's right. So if you do want to catch the Atheist Drinking Out Loud, by the way, guys, head over to Laughing into Disbelief channel with Andy there and check out his channel there and sub to that. You'll get the notifications when we go live. We only do it once a month, so it's entirely up to you. All right, guys, as I always say at the end of the interviews, like the late, great Christopher Hitchens once said, it's called faith because it's not next time. Or it's not because it's not knowledge. And we'll see. I got my quotes all mixed up there. We'll see you guys next time.